The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland. From the University of Maryland, this is Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff.
After a century of de facto disenfranchisement of many African Americans in the U.S., the Voting Rights Act of 1965 outlawed discriminatory voting practices and provided for tough federal enforcement. But the U.S. Justice Department soon went further, pushing states to alter the boundaries of their electoral districts to encourage the election of black and other minority candidates in a process known as racial redistricting. How does this process work? And how has it changed elections and the makeup of the U.S. Congress? More importantly, is it fair? Joining us to discuss the past and future of racial redistricting is Abigail Thernstrom, an adjunct scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and author of Voting Rights and Wrongs, the Elusive Quest for Racially Fair Elections. And now the host of Policy Watch, Doug Besheroff.
Abigail Thernstrom, welcome to Policy Watch and the University of Maryland.
I'm delighted to be here.
You've just written this book. It's called Voting Rights and Wrongs, the Elusive Quest for Racially Fair Elections.
I have.
And I want to talk to you about it.
Delighted.
So our main topic today is racial redistricting. And for our audience, let me ask you, what is racial redistricting?
It is drawing district lines, legislative district lines, with race very much in mind, so that you have safe black or Hispanic districts.
Which means they try to make them 55, 60%, even more black or Hispanic.
The rule of thumb has been 65%, actually,
65%.
To compensate for low minority turnout, which is pervasive.
What was the impetus for this kind of racial redistricting? We had one man, one vote in the 1960s. We had the Civil Rights Act in the late 1960s. Why didn't that take care of it?
It didn't take care of it because giving blacks the ballot is not sufficient to ensure black representation.
But that wasn't the original legal test, was it? Well, I thought it was about disenfranchisement, and I thought one of the responses in not just the South, but in other parts of the country, was to go from multi-district to single-district voting, where there was a whole list of candidates, and so that the whites still got elected. I thought that there was a process of trying to undo black voting rights.
There was a process of trying to what's called dilute the impact of black ballots by changing an election system from single-member districts, and this occurred in the South, the Voting Rights Act is about the South, changing electoral districts from single-member districts to what are called at-large voting, which means county-wide voting or city-wide voting, and in a majority-white setting, that means blacks. And if whites won't vote for blacks, that means no blacks are going to get elected.
So when does racial redistricting start? Who's the president?
It starts around 1970.
This is Richard Nixon.
This is Richard Nixon. And what triggered it is racist, white, of course white, legislatures in Mississippi and elsewhere who decided to structure elections so blacks couldn't win.
So comes the imposition of racial redistricting. And we already talked about the fact that the way it's done, the rule of thumb is 65% of the district needs to be or should be black or Hispanic because of low voting rates and so forth. So I suppose the first thing we should talk about is the fact that that gives us more black and Latino representatives in Congress.
Although the 65% is no longer necessary. It's too high now because there are so many whites voting for black candidates, and so that number has now varies a bit.
And also my impression is that housing, living patterns have shifted a little bit, so there aren't the same kinds of concentrations as in the past.
The residential patterns have shifted enormously, but the reaction of courts and the Justice Department to that shift has been to chase black and Latino voters who have moved out to the suburbs, so they chase them with distorted lines.
And the Supreme Court has begun to say some of those lines are a little exaggerated.
It began to say that, yes, in the 1990s, but then it kind of gave up on that whole line of argument because it couldn't figure out what lines were legitimate and what weren't. And now, under Chief Justice Roberts, it's once again chewing its nails over all this, what he calls divvying up of Americans along lines of race and ethnicity.
So if one group of winners are the Latino and the black candidates, there are also winners on the other side of the political fence, the Republicans.
Right.
Explain.
If you have to search for black families and black voters and draw all these bizarre lines in order to make sure they're all huddled in a majority-minority district so that it's safe for the election of minority candidates, then you're taking those black voters from what used to be racially integrated districts. You bleach, what's called bleach surrounding districts. They become whiter.
But it doesn't have to become whiter. They just become more Republican.
The two are one and the same in the South. Bleach districts, whiter districts, are more Republican districts, and the Republicans in the South were laughing all the way to the political bank.
Now, the other thing that happens here is these districts then become somewhat more politically extreme. If they don't have a mixture of moderates and liberals and conservatives, then in the primaries, each party tends to move to the direction of its extreme. Is that right?
Oh, that's absolutely right. In these, I think it's true of the Republican districts, but I also think it's particularly true of these majority black districts. The primary is the only election that counts, and the candidate who wins tends to be the person who plays the race card most clearly, most effectively.
And you've written that it's not just that they play the race card, but that because they are in that kind of district, they're not in the mainstream of political thinking, discourse. Tell us what you meant by that.
Well, black voters tend, in general, to be to the left of center, and the issues that they care about tend to be left issues, and the candidates, therefore, run on those issues, and we end up with a Congressional Black Caucus, which is very left, when this is a centrist country.
I did some research. 535 members of Congress, 42 members of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Right.
It's about 8% of the Congress, compared to about 14% of the general population. So it's not proportionate.
Yeah.
24 members of the Hispanic Caucus, about 4.5% of the total, compared to 13% of the population, although a lot of non-voters.
I was going to say,
illegal.
a lot of non-voters.
The interesting thing I found in this, there are, I think it's 3 Republicans in a parallel Hispanic caucus. No black Republicans today, although there have been in the past.
There have been a few in the past, J.C. Watts, obviously, but and there have been a few whites elected from majority black districts who would like to join the Congressional Black Caucus and have been told in no uncertain terms, no whites are welcome.
Now, what's the role of the first the Black Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, and then the Hispanic Caucus?
Well, its role is to make noise about the issues it cares about. But unless, I mean, it really risks marginalization, given what the politics of its members are in general. Even though because of longevity, because these are very safe districts, the incumbents keep getting reelected, they do have a lot of committee chairmanships, but nevertheless.
Now, as chairmanships, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was, of course, one of the most famous chairmen. These chairmen have a great deal of power. Charlie Rangel, obviously, yes. They do have a great deal of power when you have a Democratic administration and Democrats overwhelmingly controlling the House, particularly. Nevertheless, it is when you look at what their agendas are, it is hard to say that, except for the issues on which all Democrats agree, like health care, it's hard to say they get anywhere with what their chief, the chief things they care about. Now,
black reparations, for instance, is something that is often taken up. It's a dead-on-arrival issue.
Black reparations being?
Black reparations being reparations for slavery in the form of cash handouts.
But I've heard many people say they'd be delighted if they could write a one-time check.
No, you've heard some people say that.
Yes, for sure.
Yes, very few, actually.
But I think I remember that the Black Caucus was an important element in protecting Bill Clinton during the impeachment process.
I think that is true. They really rallied around, a man who was called the first black president. It's a ridiculous definition.
It worked.
It worked, absolutely. And it continues to work in the sense that the Democratic Party is, well, first place, majority of blacks started out as Hillary supporters, not Obama supporters, remarkably. And it was when they saw Obama had a chance of winning.
When they saw whites voting for Obama.
When they saw whites in the early primaries coming around to Obama, they thought, okay, they feel free to go to Obama. But they were very devoted Clintonistas.
Well, we talked about the Clinton impeachment where they might have made it, where the Black Caucus might have made a difference, and reparations where they didn't. How about on the health care debate?
It's very hard to tell on the health care debate. I mean, you've got such Democratic solidarity behind some form of health care, and Pelosi has, much to my surprise, really has been able to rally her troops. So it's hard to tell on that issue. But look, Democrats need solidarity. There is no group more loyal to the Democratic Party than black Americans.
What role does the Hispanic caucus play?
First place, there's much more economic diversity in the Latino community nationally. You've got a lot of small businessmen who are Latino, much less true of blacks. And
you have Cubans.
And you have Cubans, exactly. Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans are very black-like in their political views, but other groups much less so.
What role do they play in the immigration debates?
Well, they're a bit split on immigration, but in general, I think they are pushing for legalization.
Mm-hmm.
I would not regard myself as an expert on that topic, but...
Well, going back now to the black districts, you've written, you pointed this out a moment ago, that maybe the biggest cost to the black politicians in those districts is that they're trapped in the politics of those districts.
Absolutely.
And I was quite impressed with your analysis of the Barack Obama phenomenon. And you seem to be crediting part of it to the fact that he didn't get caught in one of those districts, tried to win in one of those districts, and didn't. Tell us about it.
Yeah, he ran in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago district, overwhelmingly black, a district that has a taste for radical black politicians. He ran in the primary against Bobby Rush.
Congressman Bobby, former.
Well, he won.
Yeah.
Correct. He ran against Bobby Rush. He lost. Bobby Rush was a former Panther. He lost. Best thing that ever happened to Barack Obama. Because he would have been trapped and labeled. Black politician, part of the Congressional Black Caucus, on the periphery of American politics, unless you've got what you have now, this overwhelmingly Democratic Congress. And he would he would not have had training in that district. He would never have been trained to put together biracial coalitions, which he did in running for the presidency. 43% of whites voted for him.
And he could speak to whites.
Now, that is in part a matter of who he was and his history, his background. But you can't imagine, with very few exceptions, members of the Congressional Black Caucus today running even for statewide office, no less the presidency. They are black politicians, and you underline black. And they're not going anywhere in terms of offices for which you have to put together a biracial coalition or a multiracial coalition.
I wonder how much of that is their nature, who they are, because they've got elected, or the fact that it's so difficult to make the switch over. You know, to take the other extreme, Mitt Romney tried to go right, at least on cultural issues, and just couldn't do it. So it could as much be, couldn't it, that they've been in one track and it's hard to switch.
It is true. They've been in one track. It is hard to switch. But were the districting different, they would be forced from the outset.
From the outset. I think that's the key point. Yeah.
To learn how to put biracial coalitions together. And there are plenty, I mean, not true in 1970 when all of this started, but by now, plenty of whites who are willing to vote for black candidates.
So, on balance, do the people that think about these things want to see change, or is the establishment so strong that they're just happy with their piece of the pie?
Well, black incumbents, like all incumbents,
are incumbents.
They like the district from which they've been running and have won so successfully, safe seats. All politicians like safe seats. And for elected blacks, they don't want anything changed. But interestingly enough, John Lewis, for instance, did speak out in 2003 and said, wait a minute, we no longer need overwhelmingly black districts. We've gotten to the point where we don't need them. And then 3 years later, he took it back. But it was very important that he said, America has changed. Whites will vote for black candidates.
If there are black candidates, we're taping this quite, at the University of Maryland. We're in the Washington, D.C. area. We are now looking at a situation in which a majority of the city council, whatever it's called in the district council, I guess, is white in a city that is majority black. So one could see even this 42 members of the Congressional Black Caucus melt away.
Well, turnout tends to be low among blacks unless they have somebody they're very excited about.
Like Barack Obama.
Or somebody they're very angry about. But look, if there's no competition in these black designer districts, as I've called them, then why vote? And many blacks don't.
And that just creates a further cycle. You mentioned before that as populations shifted, more blacks have moved to the suburbs. They've largely moved out of LA, for example.
Correct.
It becomes progressively more difficult to create these racially defined districts. So what's the next approach to protecting the black incumbents?
The assumption in drawing these districts is that blacks sitting in a suburban house who have escaped the inner city want to be linked up with their old inner city neighbors in a majority black district. I mean, social class is being ignored.
Well, let them vote Republican, and then they won't be included in the district. There is a way out of this.
Well, that is true.
Just to be a little silly. Yeah,
yes, but the next step, and it's a step that Justice Department is already taking, is to change the electoral system so that you don't have majority-minority districts, but instead you have alternative voting systems such that blacks can dump all their votes on a black candidate.
So this doesn't work for Congress, though?
No, it doesn't work for Congress.
But it would work for state and local elections?
Absolutely. You know, my view is good work, Justice Department. This is not the direction we're supposed to be going in.
Well, many of our viewers won't recognize the name Lani Guinier because she sort of fleetingly went through the political process in the first year of the Clinton administration.
Right.
Tell us who she was, and this sounds like some of her ideas.
Lani Guinier distinguished between authentic blacks and inauthentic blacks, and she wanted authentic black candidates, which are more black than ordinary black candidates.
Than she?
Yeah, than she herself, who was the product of an interracial marriage, absolutely. And Clinton proposed her as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, and people started to look at her writing and said, no, this will not do, and that was the end of her candidacy. I mean, Clinton didn't even call her to tell her she was finished, but she was finished, she learned in the newspaper. Now, her ideas have become, in the Eric Holder Justice Department and Obama's Justice Department, they're beginning to seep in the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act.
Now, this is really quite striking to me, and that's why I was interested that this was happening. Because then, 20 years ago, a firestorm.
Right.
And if I remember correctly, the Democrats still controlled the Congress when this happened.
Yep.
And you had 12, 14 years of Republican rule when the voting rights bill gets expanded, and I think the emergency declared for 25 years more. And now you have this, let's just call it the Lani Guinier approach to redistricting happening. Where is the complaint? Now, I know there's a book here called Voting Rights and Wrongs, but where is the rest of the outrage?
Well, I think first place, this is occurring, this kind of quasi-proportional representations, settlements that involve, in effect, proportional racial and ethnic representation. It's occurring at the local level, and it only started about 5 months ago, and it has involved 3 towns, one of them absolutely minuscule. So it's below the radar screen of the American public. Lani Guinier was not below the radar screen. She was getting a big appointment in the Clinton administration.
But we're running out of time, but I want to press you because the Republicans seem really gun-shy on the voting rights issue.
The Republicans are gun-shy on every civil rights issue. They want them to go away. They hide under their desks. They won't protest.
So what's the voice they should adopt if they want? It doesn't have to be the Republicans, but people who are worried about this. Is there a voice, is there a rhetoric to adopt that reaffirms American values and civil rights values?
I think there is. You talk about the end goal of the Voting Rights Act, which was the political integration of American politics, and you say, this is walking us in the wrong direction. And we can all agree that at the end of the day, we want the post-racial American polity that Barack Obama talked about in his campaign. That's not the way the Justice Department is governing.
Well, I think isn't it also the case that for most black Americans, even though we have a black president and more African Americans in positions of great power than ever before, they still don't think that time is coming?
there's a lot of pessimism in the black community, and it's showing up in the polls, and it feeds on itself, and it's very destructive to the fabric of race relations in this country, and there's nobody speaking out against it. There's nobody standing tall and saying, we believe in integrated politics, and this is not the way to get there.
Well, let's hope we'll get that voice soon. Let's hope that your book helps encourage people to speak. That would be very nice. Abigail Thernstrom, thank you so much for being with us on Policy Watch.
My pleasure.
Come back again.
Often.
And to our viewing public, let me just say thank you so much for tuning in. This is Doug Besharov. If you have any questions, comments, or complaints, you can write to us at PolicyWatch at UMD, that's UMD for University of Maryland, .edu. Again, thanks for being with us. Abby Thernstrom, thank you so much.
Thanks, Doug.
This program was produced by the University of Maryland, which is solely responsible for its content. The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besharov at the University of Maryland.
We are PBS.